Why do the most peaceful people often have the darkest past? What if the secret to inner calm isn't avoiding your demons, but dancing with them? Tonight, we're going to explore something that will shatter everything you think you know about finding peace. Because Carl Jung discovered that the path to serenity doesn't run around your darkness, it runs straight through it. You see, there's a part of you that you've been running from your entire life. A shadow that follows you everywhere, containing everything you've rejected about yourself. Your anger, your selfishness, your cruelty, your weakness. Society taught you to hide these parts, to pretend they don't exist, but Jung knew better. He understood that what you resist persists, and what you embrace transforms. The person who has learned to befriend their shadow becomes untouchable. Not because they're perfect, but because they're complete. They've stopped fighting an internal war that everyone else is still losing. They found peace not through elimination, but through integration. And this makes them dangerous to a world built on the illusion of moral purity. Watch how someone changes when they stop pretending to be good. When they stop performing virtue and start embodying wholeness. They become calm in a way that's both magnetic and terrifying. They've stopped lying to themselves. And that honesty creates a presence that cuts through everyone else's pretense like a blade through silk. Jung called this individuation the process of becoming whole by integrating all parts of yourself, including the parts you've been taught to hate. It's not about becoming evil, it's about becoming real. It's about accepting the full spectrum of human nature within yourself so you can finally stop projecting it onto others. What if the greatest act of self-love isn't accepting your light, but embracing your darkness? Here stands the archetype Jung revealed, the integrated human being who has looked into their own abyss and found not a monster, but a teacher. This person has learned what Nietzsche meant when he said, one must have chaos within oneself to give birth to a dancing star. They've stopped running from their shadow and started learning from it. They've discovered that their anger contains wisdom about boundaries, their selfishness teaches them about self-preservation. Their cruelty holds lessons about necessary honesty. This is the individual who has broken free from the moral slavery that keeps everyone else performing goodness, while their shadow grows stronger in the darkness. They don't need to prove their virtue because they've accepted their capacity for vice. They don't need to defend their character because they've integrated their contradictions. They've become like a master swordsman who never needs to draw. Their blade, everyone can sense the weapon, but it's never used carelessly. Jung saw this person as psychologically complete. Someone who had achieved what he called the transcendent function, the ability to hold opposing forces within themselves, without being torn apart. They can be gentle and fierce, compassionate, and ruthless, loving and detached. They've learned that wholeness isn't about eliminating certain aspects of human nature, but about integrating them consciously. This integration creates a kind of inner peace that's unshakable, because it's not dependent on external validation or the maintenance of a false image. They've stopped trying to be good and started trying to be whole. And in that wholeness, they've found a serenity that those who live in denial can never access. But here's what makes them truly dangerous to society. They can't be controlled through guilt, shame, or moral manipulation, because they've already accepted the worst about themselves. The modern world has made this integration nearly impossible. We're surrounded by mirrors that show us only what we want to see, algorithms that feed us only what we already believe, people who validate only the parts of us that make them comfortable. We've created a society of fragments, each person showing only their acceptable pieces while their shadow grows stronger in the darkness. Social media has turned us into curators of our own virtue, constantly editing out anything that might reveal our wholeness. We post our light and hide our darkness, creating a collective delusion that we're all good people having bad thoughts rather than complete human beings containing multitudes. But the integrated person sees through this performance. They recognize the shadow projections happening everywhere, people hating in others what they refuse to accept in themselves. They see the angry person who preaches love, the selfish person who demands sacrifice, the weak person who projects strength. And they can't unsee it. They can't go back to the comfortable illusions that keep everyone else asleep. This is why They're feared. Not because they're evil, but because they're real. They've stopped playing the game of moral performance that society depends on. They've learned to love their own darkness, and that makes them immune to the shame-based control mechanisms that keep everyone else in line. They've become psychologically free, and in a world built on psychological slavery, freedom is always perceived as a threat. What happens when you stop fighting yourself and start understanding yourself? Picture a wolf that has learned to live with its own hunger instead of being consumed by it. It doesn't deny its predatory nature, it integrates it. It becomes more dangerous, yes, but also more controlled. More powerful, but also more precise. It knows exactly what it's capable of, and that knowledge brings a kind of peace that sheep will never understand. This is what happens when you embrace your shadow. You don't become a monster, you become a complete human being. You gain access to energies that were previously working against you. Your anger becomes discernment. Your selfishness becomes healthy boundaries. Your cruelty becomes necessary honesty. Your weakness becomes authentic vulnerability. Like a river that has learned to flow around rocks instead of crashing against them, you find a way to move through life that's both powerful and graceful. The shadow isn't your enemy, it's your teacher. It's the part of you that knows what you're capable of, that understands the full spectrum of human nature, that can navigate the world with both wisdom and strength. When you stop running from it and start learning from it, you discover that it's been trying to protect you all along. Your anger was trying to teach you about boundaries. Your selfishness was trying to show you the importance of self-care. Your cruelty was trying to help you see through illusions. Your weakness was trying to teach you about humility. The shadow contains not just your darkness but your power. And when you integrate that power consciously, you become unstoppable. Is the person who has made peace with their demons more dangerous than the one still fighting them? Imagine a man sitting alone in his study at 3 a.m., not running from his thoughts but welcoming them. The thoughts that would terrify others, thoughts of violence, of selfishness, of abandonment. He doesn't push them away. He examines them like a scientist studying specimens. He asks them what they're trying to tell him. He listens to their wisdom. This is the man who has learned to be comfortable with his own darkness. He's not acting on these impulses, he's understanding them. He's not being consumed by them, he's being informed by them. He's learned that the shadow isn't his enemy, but his teacher. And this education has given him a kind of peace that those who live in denial can never access. He walks through the world differently now. When someone tries to trigger his anger, he feels it rise but doesn't let it control him. When someone attempts to manipulate him through guilt, he recognizes the pattern but doesn't fall into it. When someone projects their shadow onto him, he sees it clearly but doesn't absorb it. He's become like a mirror that reflects without being stained, a mountain that stands unmoved by the storms that rage around it. This is the freedom Jung promised, but few have the courage to claim. The freedom that comes from self-acceptance so complete that external approval becomes irrelevant. The peace that emerges when you stop trying to be good and start trying to be whole. The strength that develops when you integrate your darkness instead of being ruled by it. But this peace comes with a price. You can no longer pretend to be innocent. You can no longer hide behind the illusion of moral purity. You must face the truth about human nature, starting with your own. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Once you accept it, you can't go back to denial. Once you integrate it, you can't return to fragmentation. What would happen if you stopped being afraid of your own capacity for darkness? The nights become different when you stop fighting yourself. Instead of exhausting battles with your own nature, you find a strange kind of companionship. You're no longer divided against yourself. You're no longer spending energy maintaining a false image. You're no longer terrified that someone might discover who you really are, because you've already discovered it yourself. There's a profound relaxation that comes from this acceptance. Like a clenched fist finally opening, like a held breath finally being released, like a tense muscle finally letting go. You don't have to be perfect anymore. You don't have to pretend to be pure. You don't have to hide your contradictions or explain away your complexities. You can simply be human, messy, complicated, dark, and light all at once. This is what Jung meant by individuation. Not the process of becoming perfect, but the process of becoming whole. Not the elimination of the shadow, but the integration of it. Not the conquest of darkness, but the marriage of light and shadow into something greater than either alone. The person who has achieved this integration becomes like a tree that has roots, extending both into the earth and branches reaching toward the sky. They're grounded in their darkness and elevated by their light. They can access both their power and their compassion, their strength and their vulnerability, their wisdom and their foolishness. They've learned that wholeness isn't about being good, it's about being real. And in that reality, they've found a peace that surpasses understanding. But here's the paradox. The more you accept your capacity for darkness, the less likely you are to act on it. The more you embrace your shadow, the more conscious you become of your choices. The more you integrate your wholeness, the more naturally you move toward what serves life rather than what destroys it. Why do you think those who claim to be pure are often the most dangerous? But here's what no one tells you about shadow work. It's lonely. Not because you're alone, but because you can see what others cannot. You can see the shadow projections happening everywhere, people hating in others what they refuse to accept in themselves. You can see the unconscious motivations driving behavior that everyone else takes at face value. You become like a psychologist at a social gathering, seeing through the personas everyone is wearing to the shadow they're trying to hide. You see the angry person who preaches love, the selfish person who demands sacrifice, the weak person who projects strength. And you can't unsee it. You can't go back to the comfortable illusions that keep everyone else asleep. This is why the integrated person often walks alone. Not because they're antisocial, but because they've graduated from the unconscious games that most relationships are built on. They've learned to love their own darkness, and that makes them incompatible with people who are still fighting theirs. They can't participate in the collective delusion that we're all good people having bad thoughts. They can't pretend that the shadow doesn't exist. They can't go back to the comfortable lie that moral purity is possible or even desirable. This isolation isn't punishment. It's the natural consequence of psychological growth. When you evolve beyond the need for external validation, you naturally move away from relationships based on mutual validation. When you stop projecting your shadow onto others, you can no longer bond through shared projections. When you integrate your wholeness, you can no longer connect through shared fragmentation. But in this solitude, you discover something profound. You're not alone. You're finally whole. You're finally complete. You're finally at peace with yourself. And that peace is worth more than all the shallow connections you've left behind. Can you handle being disliked for being real more than being loved for being fake? There's a moment that comes to everyone who does this work. You're in a situation that would have triggered your old patterns, someone attacking your character, someone questioning your worth, someone trying to make you feel small. But instead of the familiar surge of defensive anger or hurt, you feel something else. You feel calm, you feel centered, you feel amused because you know who you are. You've seen your worst impulses and made peace with them. You've accepted your capacity for darkness and integrated it into your wholeness. You're no longer defending an image. You're simply being yourself. And that authenticity is so grounded, so complete, that external attacks can't penetrate it. This is the peace Jung wrote about. Not the peace of the innocent, but the peace of the integrated. Not the calm of those who have never faced their darkness, but the serenity of those who have danced with it and made it their ally. Not the quiet of emptiness, but the stillness of wholeness. The person who has embraced their shadow becomes like a master swordsman who never needs to draw their blade. They carry their darkness not as a burden but as a tool. They know exactly what they're capable of, and that knowledge gives them a kind of power that's both visible and invisible. People sense it without understanding it. They feel safe with this person and threatened by them at the same time. This is the final stage of psychological development that Jung described. The person who has integrated their shadow doesn't need to prove their worth because they've accepted their unworthiness. They don't need to defend their goodness because they've embraced their capacity for evil. They don't need to seek peace because they've become peace itself. In a world full of fragments pretending to be whole, the integrated person becomes a living reminder of what's possible. They don't preach about shadow work, they embody it. They don't tell others to embrace their darkness, they demonstrate what happens when you do. They become a lighthouse in the storm, not by avoiding the darkness, but by making it part of their light. What if the most dangerous person isn't the one hiding their darkness, but the one who's made peace with it? The person who has integrated. Their shadow becomes untouchable in the truest sense. Not because they're perfect, but because they're complete. They can't be manipulated through guilt because they've accepted their capacity for selfishness. They can't be controlled through shame because they've embraced their imperfections. They can't be broken because they've already been shattered and rebuilt themselves stronger. They move through the world like water, adaptable, powerful, finding their way around obstacles without losing their essential nature. They can be gentle with those who need gentleness and fierce with those who need boundaries. They can be compassionate without being weak, strong without being cruel, honest without being brutal. This is the freedom that comes from self-acceptance. So complete that external approval becomes irrelevant. The peace that emerges when you stop trying to be good and start trying to be whole. The strength that develops when you integrate your darkness instead of being ruled by it. They've learned that the shadow isn't something to be conquered, but something to be understood. Not an enemy to be defeated, but a teacher to be honored. Not a burden to be carried, but a power to be wielded consciously. And in that integration, they found what Jung called the transcendent function, the ability to hold opposing forces within themselves without being torn apart. They've become living proof that wholeness is possible, that peace can be achieved, that the human condition doesn't have to be a war between light and dark, but can be a dance between complementary forces. In a world that profits from your fragmentation, your integration becomes a revolutionary act. Your peace becomes a form of rebellion. Your wholeness becomes a threat to systems built on shame and control. And perhaps that's exactly what the world needs: people who have learned to embrace their shadows and found peace not in perfection, but in the courageous acceptance of their complete humanity. Maybe the most dangerous person in any room isn't the one who's trying to hide their darkness, it's the one who's made peace with it. Perhaps true peace isn't the absence of conflict, but the integration of all conflicting parts within yourself. Maybe the most profound strength isn't the ability to conquer your demons, but the wisdom to make them your allies. Do you know someone like this? Someone who seems to have found a peace that doesn't depend on external circumstances? Someone who's comfortable with their own darkness and therefore untouchable by others' projections? Or maybe you're starting to feel that integration happening within yourself, the slow, uncomfortable, beautiful process of becoming whole. If this exploration touched something deep within you, if it made you curious about your own shadow, if it sparked a recognition of your own journey toward wholeness, then you're ready for more. Subscribe to join others who have chosen the path of integration over the illusion of perfection. Here, every insight is a step toward psychological wholeness. Every realization is a movement toward authentic peace.